President Biden seems on a race to give Ukraine as much money as he possibly can before he leaves office, to give him as much military equipment, as much ammunition, everything as fast as he can get it. And now it's being reported that actually he's going to end up leaving billions of dollars that were still allocated to the Ukraine for Trump to have to allocate. Apparently, they've been trying to get as much as they can over there as fast as they can, but they would have to spend somewhere, if I remember correctly, between $100 and $130 million per day to get these things out there. Of course, there's just logistic hurdles for some of that. And the question needs to be, why? Why are we trying so hard, so fast to get as much stuff as possible over there? Now, from all that's being reported, this is the final tranche of the $61 billion that was allocated by Congress for Ukraine this past, I think it was April or May. And you may recall that after it took 6 months to get that money allocated. It had been promised all this time, and everybody was saying that was part of the reason why the Ukraine side was losing and why the Russians were gaining ground, moving the Eastern Front further and further to the west, all that. But as soon as we got that money, it's late, but at least finally it came there. And what did we have? Well, you've seen that graphic that Gary has shown several times from the New York Times in October, to where it shows month by month how Russia continued to escalate and increase the amount of money. You know what's interesting about that chart is that when it really starts to trick up and to trend higher, and the Russians gain more and more territory, and the Ukraine side lost more and more troops. You know what's interesting about that is that it came after the allocation of that $61 billion. So the more stuff we've given them, the more equipment, the more ammunition, the more territory they've lost. Far from being responsible for what happened before that. Gary, if you can find that and throw it up there, I want to put that up there. It's the one with the chart from the New York Times that has the bar graph going up. If you can find that one, because it's really instructive. When people hear this, Biden sending money, the thought is, and kind of understandably so, for people who may not understand how military affairs work, it's like, well, of course, they're at war. So every dollar you can give them, every bullet you can give them is certainly going to be needed. I mean, they need that stuff to fight a war, for crying out loud. But then you look at that chart and you see, yeah, but hang on. It's not making a difference. As a matter of fact, you can argue that it was looking a little bit better before the money was given, and in comparison to what it was since that time. So they are losing more and more territory. The Ukraine side is, since that money come on, and you've seen it. It's at increasingly higher rates every month. And that chart that I've shown before, it shows the end one is I think it's 500 some odd square kilometers that were captured by Russia in the month of October. And now then we still have about 4 or 5 days, I guess, left in November, and it's already exceeded the total for October. So what that tells you is, it doesn't matter how much money we give, it doesn't matter how many bullets, it doesn't matter how many bombs, how many HIMARS missiles, etc. It's just not going to make any difference, because, folks, I say this a lot, but it bears repeating because some people still don't get it. It's about men. It's not about money. It's not about machines even. It's not even about ammunition, though you need all of that stuff. If your manpower is insufficient, it won't matter how much stuff you get. And if you recall yesterday's show, go back and look at it where I was talking about that and showed Julian Rupka a film that he has made and he published yesterday that demonstrated that even in the areas that the Ukraine side considered the most important, in the southern Donetsk area, and where they had built actually good defenses, high quality trench lines, that they didn't have enough people to hold on to it. They don't have enough people to adequately defend it. But the Russians do have enough to actually overtake those things, and they are able to do that. It's about manpower. Same thing in the Kursk area. That graphic Gary just showed a second ago. 40% of what they had taken, the Ukraine side originally taken back in early August, is now gone. And by some calculations, it's actually closer to 50%. But no matter what the number is, it's going down. They keep sending in reserves. They keep sending in additional equipment, and they keep losing their stuff. You see, it's happening all over the case. So then one has to wonder, Maybe the president doesn't read the New York Times. I don't know. Seems like he would have classified information that's even more accurate than the New York Times is, than their open source. So he's got to know more than what we know. What we know is sufficient to see. It is beyond clear that there's no point in continuing to prosecute this war, much less to shovel this stuff in there faster. Because all the net result of it is by shoveling these dollars as fast as you can into Ukraine, and Ukraine is concurrently shoveling their men into the front lines. It's like shoveling coal into a furnace. You're just burning it up. And when the fire goes out, then you still are cold. And that's what's happening here. There is a finite number of Ukrainian men. You cannot keep throwing them into the dung heap. Sorry for the terminology. And forever, there will come an end. And we're fast approaching that end here. And then it's interesting that it's not even enough. So you saw that headline. Biden's trying to give as much stuff as he can, all the money that's been accounted for. I think it's $6 billion that had not yet been given. They can't give it fast enough. And then on the way out the door, he's actually going to try to add 24 billion more. And you just have to ask, towards what end? Why are we so myopically focused on cash? Now, taking the difficult turn on it, you can say, well, okay, it's because most of that cash ain't going to Ukraine. It's going to arms manufacturers. It's going to American jobs, as we love to say so many times in the United States, like that's a good deal. Yeah, it makes money for us. Of course, if the Ukraine, a bunch of people get killed, we always say, well, hey, they're fighting this war. I mean, they want this stuff. They want the ammunition. They want the weapon system. So, who are we to say no? This is what they're asking for. Straight up, they are. So let's just give it to them. Well, in my view, that is the equivalent of saying, hey, this guy's a drug addict, but he's asking for some drugs. I mean, who am I to say no to him? I mean, I'm not forcing it into his veins. If he wants to do it, that's fine. If I profit from giving him some drugs, well, who's to say anything against that? That's kind of the situation here, because they are an equivalent, really, as a nation, of a drug addict. They don't know any other way. They can't think straight. They just think, we're under fire, give me more weapons, so you do. Here's the problem with that. Here's why there is the direct analogy. By giving them more of these weapons and ammunition, it gives them the illusion that they can continue the struggle, and this mentality that, well, if we just hang on a little longer, maybe the tide will turn. It won't. And there are fundamental, practical issues. It would take a mountain to get over, and they don't have anywhere near the capacity to even plausibly, theoretically surmount that mountain. They don't. But to the guys who are fighting, they're not thinking about a mountain. They're not thinking about all these things like we are. They're just thinking about what's in front of them right now. Yes, because otherwise to say no, that means you have to start making a negotiated settlement to end the war. And then you have to go through the pain, the humiliation, the difficulties, and everything that would be bad for the Ukrainians. And I don't diminish any of those things. They would all be true. It would be horrible for them to finally submit. But somebody has to be thinking more clearly. We need to stop doing this kind of stuff for a number of reasons, but we'll, for the moment, just look at the Ukraine side. The most rational, the most moral thing we can do for the Ukraine side is stop the flow of weapons and ammunition. Let me explain why. Because that seems counterintuitive to some, but no, it's actually very wise. If we continue doing what Biden has been doing, it allows them to physically continue going down a destructive path that can only end in their complete defeat militarily. But if you withhold that money and that ammunition and the weapons, now then they physically can't continue to fight the war, because without all the stuff we supply, they cannot prosecute the war. Now then they have to reach a negotiated settlement. They just can't keep fighting. They just won't be able to. And it is so important for us to understand that we need to think deeper. We need to look beyond the war, not just beyond January 20th, but beyond the end of the war. However it comes to a conclusion, Ukraine is going to need its young men to have a future, to continue to propagate the Ukrainian nation. Millions have already fled the country, and now hundreds of thousands, possibly beyond 1 million, have been killed or wounded in this war. No matter what you're hearing, the likelihood is that the casualty count is that high. And believe me, one of the most under-considered issues is the PTSD that has been inflicted on those that survive. And that is going to be enormously difficult. It's going to take a generation to recover from some of that. Some may never. And I promise you, it is going to be a huge, huge issue for Ukraine to navigate in the decades to come, no matter what happens from this point forward. So if they're to have any chance to build a future and a hope, we need to stop the carnage right now and don't lose one more Ukrainian man or woman that is necessary so that they can build a future and that they have someone to build it with. That's what we ought to be doing instead of just, shoveling boatloads of money as fast as we can send it over there. It's not going to make any difference. But listen, that's not the only issue. That's the issue that has to do with Ukraine. There's also our own national interest. Now, I've mentioned many times before that there's also a net loss effect that all of these interceptor missiles we send, long-range ATACMS that we send, all the artillery shells, etc., all these kinds of things, all these weapon systems themselves to fire some of this stuff, this is all a net loss for us because it takes in the years with an S plural to recover and rebuild all this stuff given the state of our defense industrial base. This is not something you can do overnight. It doesn't matter. You can print money all day long. It won't make any difference. You can't buy stuff that you have to physically produce, and it takes time to get all this stuff done. So the longer we keep going, the more our own stocks are diminished and our own sustainment capabilities, if we should get drawn into a war, are further reduced. So for our own needs, we need to do that. Then, of course, there's the issue that's on the table right now of what if the war is escalated? What if we continue moving down this path? So as you know, from watching our channel here, there's been a lot that's going on here recently to where we say, Biden gave permission to use the long-range missiles even after his side lost the election and Trump was elected saying he's going to end the war. He still took the risk of escalating the war and allowed Ukraine to use long-range weapons, which they did within, I think, 24 hours. Russia made their statement. They lowered the threshold of their nuclear doctrine, make it more possible for us to get into a nuclear war. And then they followed that up with the launch of the Oreshnik missile, this new kind of intermediate range ballistic missile, which has devastating warheads. Interestingly, also, we've known since even Professor Postal came on our show that those warheads were actually inert. They weren't explosive even. They were just basically large lumps of metal. Because of the speed at Mach 10 they come in, they are absolutely devastating to anything they hit. They don't even have to have explosive because they basically carry their own kinetic energy with them. And of course, the warheads can be outfitted with nuclear weapons. So Putin laid that across the bow. That should have ended the discussion right there. We shouldn't have fired anymore, but we did. Yesterday, there were 2 more rounds of ATACMS that were fired. And in response, Russia says, okay, then we're going to take step 2. We promised it would be a response. We did with the Oreshnik missile. Now, you didn't listen to that, so there's going to be another response. And Russia is saying, yes, we are going to vow retaliation for this. And we're trying to find out right now. We also have news out, I think it was this morning, maybe last night, that the Cosmodrome in Russia, the one that was used to fire the Oreshnik missile, has closed the airspace between now and the 30th of November, which, by the way, is what they did prior to firing the Oreshnik missile. So it is increasingly looking like they're going to do something else. And because this last one, the way escalation works, if the last message from Russia with the Oreshnik missile in Dnipro did not solve the problem and did not deter us any further, and we kept sending missiles, then you can count on the likelihood, almost the certainty, is that whatever they do next will be another level up. Who knows? Maybe they're going to fire at something, some NATO installation somewhere where there's some NATO command and control, where there's huge numbers of missiles or ammunition, something like that. or it could be at some of the power ministries in Kiev. They may go after the president himself. It's unknown. Maybe they're the minister of defense. It could be some major strike like that. In a worst case scenario, it could be like a NATO ammunition depot. It could be maybe that air defense missile or that Aegis Ashore system that we built in Poland. Anything is possible. I doubt that they would do that. I put that actually pretty low on the priority list this time. But if we continue going on, if they do something that is bigger and more escalating, of course, there's the risk that our side is going to say, oh, see, I told you that he was evil and wicked. Look what he did, as though there was no antecedent for it, as though there was no reason. He just did it out of nowhere. But they'll still say that. And look, that works rhetorically, especially on people who are not following this closely like you are. Some people in America will hear that and they'll think, because they don't even know what's going on. If they see all of a sudden Russia did this, then they're going to say, yeah, let's do something back to them. Sure, support that. But here's the problem. Russia can accelerate this and they can escalate. And this thing gets more and more dangerous and more risking a war. Now, General Pat Ryder yesterday in the Pentagon was asked about, hey, do we want to keep giving them ATACMS missiles?
The White House confirmed yesterday that Ukraine has begun using the long-range ATACMS systems inside Kursk. And so I'm wondering if there's any more information you can provide about what they're targeting, how successful those strikes have been.
The White House highlighted yesterday there has been a shift in policy and that the Ukrainians may employ ATACMS in defense of their nation, focused right now, of course, on the Kursk region. I'll let the Ukrainians speak to their operations in terms of their targeting and their operations. I just won't get ahead of them on that.
See, he's acting like, I don't know. I don't have anything to do with that. I mean, that's Ukraine. You'll have to ask them. As though it's like, yeah, look, like here, you see, this is a remote control. I don't have anything to do with it. Yeah, if y'all want to use it for something, that's cool. I don't have anything to do with it. Trying to put this separation like it's really not us. We've also seen Ms. Singh, the deputy spokesman for the Pentagon, previously has said, well, yeah, it's not us. I mean, if they want to do something with those missiles, we're not doing anything about it. And then also when she was pressed on this a little bit further, people are saying, yeah, but if this keeps going, I mean, it could kind of get into World War III. Watch this exchange.
Given the joint U.S. and NATO escalation of attacks with Ukraine against Russia and with China and North Korea joining Russia to form an alliance against the West, would not you say that World War III has begun?
I would not say that. That is not the characterization that this building assesses. And you've seen us take measures to de-escalate tensions and to and I'm sorry, I'm just speaking like broadly around the world, but when it comes to Ukraine, the commitment of this administration from the very beginning of this war was to help Ukraine take back its sovereign territory. A decision by another country to invade its sovereign neighbor cannot go unchecked. And that's why you've seen not just the United States, but 50 or so countries all around the world come together and support Ukraine through the Ukraine Defense Contact Group.
Okay, so you see there, it's like she literally laughed it off. World War III, come on, man. No, that's not what we're doing. That's not what we're thinking. Like because my words coming out of my mouth are what I want to be real, ignoring what is real. And so you see there, she's talking about, our goal has been you can't let Putin invade his neighbor. Like somehow, number one, someone gave you that authority that you get to decide who can and can't cross borders. Obviously, we're very much applauding when it's Israel who's crossing borders and attacking different people because that's one of our friends. But if it's not one of our friends, well, now then all of a sudden we're against it. It doesn't really work that way in reality. There's either a standard or there's no standard. And then it's just might makes right. So you can do with that whatever you want. But the problem we have right here, and is illustrated by her comments right there, is that we want this outcome. We want Russia to lose. And even now, even after all of this stuff, even after nearly 3 years of absolute unmitigated disaster for the Ukraine side, we're still using those same language as though somehow, if we just say it a little bit more, tomorrow it'll become real. But you see, Russia is not bound by this kind of nonsensical words. They're only looking at what's on the ground. And they're seeing that what's on the ground are American weapons being used to fire into their country. After we have been expressly warned that there are consequences to this and what they would be, we keep ignoring it. So, of course, Russia's thinking, if you're going to keep ignoring this, then here's the perverse part. That undermines their ability to de-escalate, because they are now lose the incentive to actually not accelerate this, because they see that even if they take this action that shows they have a lot of capacity and that we have very limited intercepting capacity, and if the Russians use that weapon elsewhere against some of our assets, there's literally nothing we can do about it. And instead of taking the rational understanding that just cool it a little bit, you want to keep going with the rhetoric. If you need to do that, fine. Just make sure that your actions stop there. We would probably be okay, but we're not. We keep going on. And part of the reason why we keep doing stuff like this is not just the official spokespeople, but it's other people that have credibility in the eyes of the United States. And it's really, really disappointing to me that this continues on, that people keep giving the mic to people like David Petraeus. But here's one of the things he said here recently about, again, don't really worry about nuclear escalation. It's not that big a deal.
Putin has lowered the threshold for using nuclear weapons. We seem to be able to regard this as saber rattling. Do you?
I do, but I think we should be concerned about it. I don't think that what Russia has been doing will result actually in the use of a nuclear weapon. Principle in this case, because Russia's most important partner, China, and most important oil destination, or new oil destination, India, the leaders of each of those countries have publicly cautioned Putin not even to think about the use of nuclear weapons. And I think that's very significant.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure that whatever the leader of India says is going to quake Putin in his boots. Listen, he's going to be his own leader, and they're working very closely, even with China. And there's no doubt that China doesn't want escalation into nuclear weapons. There's no doubt that they do, that China does not want this to go nuclear. They want a peaceful world so that they can do business, so that they can keep their economy going, which keeps their country happy, which keeps them in power. So definitely that's the case there. But it's pretty clear that Putin is going to take whatever action that he feels like he needs to take for his country. It's not China that's on the receiving end so far of an American missile. It's his country in Russia. And when he keeps taking action like this and his country is being harmed and his people are being killed, no leader is going to be passive on that for a very long time. And we know that he's coming under a lot of pressure inside Russia. And the question needs to be, at what point do we finally acknowledge reality? Or have we genuinely lost it and we no longer have the ability to distinguish between the words that come out of our mouths that are created in our brain and not connect them to the reality that we observe with our eyes on the ground? I mean, that's the scary scenario, is that like even Petraeus said there, he said, I think it's saber rattling. We have to be concerned about it. But then the very next sentence out of his mouth is that, but I don't think they would actually use a nuclear weapon. So let's just keep going down this path. Like, case closed. They're not going to do it, so don't even worry about it now. And you better worry about it now. It is not out of the question at all that this could easily, at this point, it's even easily spiral into a nuclear escalation. It would be catastrophic for Russia. It would be catastrophic for the United States. It would be catastrophic for Ukraine. Everybody would lose. There is no winning a nuclear war. I don't care what any alleged expert tells you. You cannot win a nuclear war. The only question is, who is going to lose worse? You are going to lose. The other side is going to lose too. There won't be a winner. And to ignore that reality and to keep playing like Russian roulette, forgive the pun, with your own future is just beyond absurd. And I just can't understand why. Listen, the pieces are already in play for the next round of this escalation ladder. As I'm speaking right now, it's Wednesday afternoon in Washington, D.C., and so far the next hammer hasn't fallen. But in all likelihood, it's like they've already tossed it up in the air, and now we're just waiting to find out what happens when it comes down. Because for them not to respond, Putin would have to be seen as being exactly what David Petraeus said, is that he's not going to do anything. And so if they don't respond to our last round of ATACMS missiles that were used, then he is going to be seen as someone who is not going to respond, and that's going to make us do even more. And Putin knows that. So I think that the likelihood is very high that they're going to do something more than they did when they hit Dnipro the other day. And that's what we're going to be watching for. And it could literally come any day. I mean, sometime between now and the 30th of November. It seems unlikely it would drag on beyond that, unless some reason for their internal processes they think that's useful. I would hope that the U.S. would finally sober up and wake up before that and say, okay, yikes, before that hammer falls, how about we do some diplomacy now? Whether that's with the Biden administration, the incoming Trump administration, say, hey, let's just cool the jets, nothing else firing into Russia. We're going to get this thing over with anyway. There's still a chance, because until Russia actually pulls a trigger and launches something for the next round of escalation, diplomacy can still save us. Diplomacy can still prevent that thing from falling, but only if we use it. And if we continue with our arrogance that we don't need to talk to the Russians, we don't need to do anything that we don't want to do, then the likelihood grows up to near certainty that the next level up the escalation ladder is going to happen probably within days. We'll wait and see how that happens. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it doesn't. But we have to be prepared for the worst. And if it does, what are we going to do next? And that'll be on a subsequent edition of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and we will cover that later. Thank you very much. Be sure and like and subscribe on your way out if you haven't already. And we will see you. Actually, tomorrow is Thanksgiving Day here in America, but we're still going to give you a show, so don't worry about that. There's many things to come. And as Gary put up there, also recall that we have our podcast is out there now. So I know a lot of you really like podcasts as opposed to a video, because you can play it when you're driving around or, out jogging, etc. Anywhere you get podcasts, type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive and you'll find us waiting there. Thank you very much. And we'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.